Several Western countries, including the U.S., announced a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics. Is this enough?
No, it is not enough. It is something, but it's not enough. So I'm glad that the United States and several other countries have announced diplomatic boycotts, because other countries, most of the Western world, most of the world has not announced any kind of a boycott. And so what message does that send? It sends a message to China that they can do whatever they want, including genocide, and the world is not going to hold them accountable at all. But regarding whether a diplomatic boycott is enough, absolutely not. Last May, I testified at the United States Congress, and at that time, I and others were urging the United States Olympics and Paralympics Committee and the International Olympics Committee to move the games, and we could have done it back then. You know, the Tokyo Games were delayed for a year because of coronavirus. Why couldn't the Beijing Games have been delayed a year because of genocide? And then the athletes would not be in a situation of being forced to compete in a land that is flowing with the blood of genocide.
You made the comparison in a press release against these, genocide games, I think the press release called them. You made the comparison between Hitler hosting the Olympics in the 1930s, I think 1936, and China now. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What are you worried is going to come after this?
So in some ways, it is actually worse to award the games to Beijing in 2022 than the Nazi Olympics in 1936, because in 1936 we did not know what Hitler was going to be doing. He hadn't done it yet. The Holocaust had not happened yet. Whereas we know that China is committing genocide. And you say the word genocide, it doesn't really convey the meaning. What constitutes this genocide? It's forced abortion, forced sterilization, systematic rape. And I'll just say one of the reports that I read about this systematic rape. So they have, I don't know how many Uyghur women in detention. They think that they have between 1 and 3 million Uyghurs in detention. So this one woman said that a young woman was gang raped in front of many, many other women, and they forced those other women to just stand there and watch this gang rape. Meanwhile, they were watching the women to see if anybody cried, if anybody winced, if anybody looked away, because if they did, then they would be punished, and who knows whether they would be the next. This is designed to just rip people's souls apart. So let's also talk about forced labor. The execution of prisoners to harvest their organs for transplant. The removal of Uyghur men from the homes and then inserting a Han Chinese man into that home to sleep in the same bed with the Uyghur woman, and spy on her. And if he says that she's not, if she has a religious extremist, like if she prays at all or whatever their definition is, remove her and then take the children to an orphanage or take them to a boarding school where they will be forced to learn everything in Chinese and forget their heritage. These are steps of genocide that are meant to destroy the Uyghur people. It's not just some kind of a concept. So, and yet China has the honor of hosting the Olympic Games, which is the most prestigious international event, arguably, in the world. And they're going to use it in the same way that Hitler used it, which is to legitimate their regime. It was after the 1936 Olympics that Hitler went out and invaded Poland, and who knows what China is going to do after these games, especially since the world has not done anything to protest it. In terms of diplomatic boycotts, just a few countries, most countries, silent. Silence is complicity, and I'm worried that they're going to invade Taiwan, for example, after these games.
What about U.S. companies, these woke corporations who are basically kowtowing to communist China because they want to either exploit cheap labor in China, terrible labor conditions for most of the workers, or even forced labor, like in Uyghur camps?
Well, I think that these so-called woke companies need to wake up and develop a conscience. You know, the only thing in the world that's important is not profits, if these profits are coming at the cost of the blood of genocide. And they need to just stop manufacturing in Xinjiang, or having, like, for example, Xinjiang cotton as part of their sourcing of their resources to build their products.
Can you describe any more some of these sort of what life is like in communist China with all of these human rights abuses? They've changed their one-child policy to now be 2 or 3-child policy, but what was life like under the one-child policy? Tell us about some of the forced abortion happenings now, and also just life in these Uyghur concentration camps.
Well, okay, so China had the one-child policy, which became a 2-child policy and then a 3-child policy in 2021. It became a 3-child policy, but that's not the end of forced abortion, because people need to understand the new rule is every married couple is allowed to have 3 children. And so what that means is that if you're not married, you're still subject to forced abortion. And if you have a 4th child, you are still subject to forced abortion legally. And reports have been coming out of Xinjiang of rampant forced abortion, forced sterilization, and even infanticide. So under the one-child policy, you know, I've testified so many times about that before Congress, but they were doing something that was very much used to atomize society. So what it was everyone became a spy on everyone else. So, like, if a woman was illegally pregnant, she could be ratted out by her family, her friends, her neighbors, her coworkers. They had people in the villages who just looked at women walking by, see if anybody was pregnant, and then if you were pregnant, they would demand to see your birth permit, and if you didn't have one, you were off to forced abortion. And so I believe that the one-child policy and the 2-child policy were designed not only to control, or not even primarily to control the population, the numbers of the population, but they were social control masquerading as population control, and the family planning police served as what I would say like domestic terrorists. They could do anything they wanted. If you were outside the policy, I mean, I have some real horror stories about things that they did to people, and they would have no repercussions whatsoever. So it was a way of turning everybody against everybody else, rupturing the normal relationships of trust, because if you don't know who you can trust, you can't organize for democracy. And so it was a way of keeping everybody down and unable to defend themselves because everyone was isolated.
Speaking of isolation, there's been a lot of just isolation in the whole world because of the coronavirus. You've spoken out against vaccine passports, and you've spoken out about China's social credit system. Tell us about China's social credit system, and also how you worry that vaccine passports that they could introduce a Western-style social credit system.
So according to tech experts, the digital app on people's phone that says whether or not they are vaccinated can very quickly incorporate the same functionality as China's social credit system. And so people, I oppose vax mandates, but even if you escape the mandate, like let's say that you get a religious exemption and you're not required to have the vaccine, that doesn't mean, if you get yourself into the system that says unvaccinated religious exemption or whatever it is, if you have that app on your phone, you are subject to all the dangers that come with the vaccine passports. So in China, they have this thing called a social credit system. And what they do is they surveil all these different aspects of society, which are already being surveilled in Western society. The difference being that in China, they're all put into a centralized database so that they come up with a score. And if, according to that score, you are a reliable Chinese communist citizen, meaning you don't make any waves, you don't criticize the government, you will lead what looks like a normal life. But if you criticize the government, your score will go down. And if you're truly a dissident, you can end up getting detained. So what they do on in their social credit system is they surveil. They have real-time geolocation, so they know where everyone is exactly, because they have facial recognition, they have gait recognition, GAIT, because people walk in different ways, so they can recognize you even if you have glasses and a mask on by the way that you walk. So they have real-time geolocation, they have facial recognition, they are monitoring your social media posts, your internet search history. So if you search for something they don't like what happened on Tiananmen Square, or Free Tibet, or I Stand with Hong Kong, or they know that. Then they combine that also with your social media posts, and all of this is medical history, criminal history. All this is attached to your credit cards and your bank account, so that if you criticize the government, like if you just say something like I stand with Hong Kong or whatever, your score is going to plummet. And they can shut off your access to your credit cards and your bank account. So in a cashless society, which I oppose, in a cashless society, what are you going to do if you can't use your credit card or your bank account? They also can make you lose your job. They make it so that you can't borrow any money, so you can't buy a home. Your kid will not get into a good school. And then if you really offend them, if you're a true dissident, or if you say something against Xi Jinping or whatever, they can disappear anybody in China within a matter of minutes, because they have facial recognition, real-time geolocation. Now, according to Jay Valentine, who's one of the tech experts I'm relying most heavily on, he is a brilliant person. He developed a fraud detection software for eBay. According to him, all of these different aspects of the Chinese Communist Party pulls together for its social credit system. In the United States and in the West, we're already surveilling this. I mean, you can't get away from your internet search history. You can't get away from your social media posts. All these things are your internet spending history. Those are like part of your permanent digital record. And that's the hard part. The hard part is getting all that tiny data together, so that we already have that. What we don't have is that it is not centralized to come up with a profile. And he says that the digital vaccine passport is the way that people can centralize this to come up with a profile. And what he also says is that it could be used to come up with, for example, a national enemies register. So that if you are somebody who is counter-narrative to the people who are in power, you could end up on a national enemies register and be isolated and separated, and who knows what else could happen to any one of us who does not go along with the prevailing narrative of the people in power. And once this social credit, once this vaccine passport is instituted, there's no going back, because you will not be able to dissent. Because as soon as you breathe dissent, they can shut you off and they can disappear you. So it's urgent that we oppose not only the vaccine mandates, but also the vaccine passports.
In China, if someone's score gets really low, is there a way to get it back up, or are they just kind of stuck in having a low score forever?
I think that the answer to that would be that it depends. I think that if your score is low because you jaywalked, you might be able to get it back up, by not jaywalking. There are ways to improve your score. Like, for example, there's something called Xi Jinping thought, which is an app you have on your phone, which is a brainwashing app, and you can listen to Xi Jinping thought every night and answer the questions, make sure that they know that you really listened, and that will improve your score. And another thing that could improve your score is if you criticized the Chinese Communist Party publicly, you could do a public forced confession. So that would be a way to improve your score.
Have you seen the show Black Mirror? Because there's a whole episode about basically a social credit system where people are ranking each other a little bit different, but just feels like we're getting into dystopia here. I mean, it really feels dystopian, all of this.
Well, it absolutely feels dystopian. And the thing is that people need to rise up now, because once this gets implemented, you're not going to be able to anymore. So that's why I've created this. I'm the co-founder of this organization it's not really an organization. I'm the co-founder of Stop Vax Passports Task Force. And so we've got a website called stopvaxpassports.org, where people can go and write, sign a petition. And we also have outstanding webinars. So webinars on why children should not be vaccinated, on the way that military vaccine mandates are destroying our military. A webinar on how the vaccine passport is a tool of totalitarianism and social control. I mean, and we have great experts, top experts in these webinars. So I would commend that to anyone.